There is a war happening inside you. And there is a very real chance that you have been fighting the wrong enemy for your entire Christian life. You have heard it from every pulpit you have ever sat in. You heard it in Sunday school when you were a child. Your own internal voice has been repeating it for so long, it has become the background noise of your faith. The flesh is weak. Crucify the flesh. Do not give in to the flesh. And somewhere along the way, deep in the wiring of how you understand God and yourself and the Christian life, you made an equation. You did not choose it consciously. It just settled into you over decades, the way sediment settles to the bottom of a river and hardens there. Flesh equals body. Body equals bad. Physical existence equals spiritual liability. Pleasure equals something to be managed. Sensation equals something to be confessed. And if you are honest with yourself, right now, that equation has cost you something. Maybe it cost you joy, the ordinary, uncomplicated joy of being alive in a body. Maybe it built a wall of shame around things that were never shameful to begin with. Maybe it gave you a version of Christianity that felt less like freedom and more like a 40-year audit of every desire you ever felt. Maybe it made you suspicious of yourself. Maybe it turned the word spiritual into everything that happens inside your head, and turned the word physical into everything you need to apologize for. Because here is what I need you to hear before we go one step further into this. That equation is not in the Bible. It is not Paul. It is not Moses. It is not Jesus. It does not come from the Hebrew prophets or the Greek apostles or anywhere in the text you have been reading your whole life. It comes from Plato, a Greek philosopher who died 348 years before Jesus was born. A man who taught that the body was a prison, that the soul was the real you, that the goal of the enlightened mind was to escape the physical world and ascend to a higher, purely spiritual reality above it. He even had a phrase for it, sema. The body is a tomb. And somewhere between the 1st century and the 21st, that idea found its way into the church. It put on Christian language. It learned to quote Paul. And it has been shaping our theology and damaging our people ever since. Today we are going to go back to a single Greek word, one word that appears over 140 times in the New Testament. One word that has been translated, mistranslated, flattened, and weaponized until it barely resembles what Paul actually wrote. Sarx, the word we translate as flesh. By the time we are done, you are going to see that the war Paul was describing was never against your body. It was against something far closer to home, and far more dangerous than anything you can touch or taste or feel. To understand what Paul meant when he wrote the word sarx, you cannot simply open a dictionary and look it up. You have to step inside the world his readers lived in. Because words do not mean things in isolation. They mean things inside a culture, inside a set of assumptions, so deeply shared that nobody thinks to question them. And the air of the 1st century Greco-Roman world was saturated with one particular idea. The material world is inferior to the spiritual world. The body is a lower, corrupted, temporary thing. The soul is the real you. And the goal of human existence is to free the soul from its physical prison and ascend to a higher reality. This was not a fringe position held by a few eccentric philosophers. This was the furniture of the educated Greco-Roman mind. Plato had established it centuries earlier. The mystery religions had absorbed it. The scholar Hans Jonas spent his career documenting how thoroughly this kind of dualism had become the common bond across religious cultures of that era. And into this world, a group called the Gnostics built a fully developed theological system on this foundation. They taught that the material world was not made by the true God at all. that the divine spark trapped inside the human body needed to escape through secret spiritual knowledge, gnosis, and return to the pure spiritual realm above. And here is what makes this so dangerous for anyone reading Paul. The Gnostics were not outside the church, they were inside it. They read Paul, they quoted Paul. They took his language about flesh and spirit and used it to say exactly what Paul was not saying, that the physical world is the enemy and the goal of faith is to escape it. John understood this threat clearly. He wrote a litmus test for it. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. 1 John 4:2. John was not being abstract. He was diagnosing a specific heresy already destroying real congregations. There were teachers inside these churches saying that Jesus only appeared to have a body, that God would never actually descend into physical flesh, that the divine and the material could not genuinely touch. John called that position the spirit of the Antichrist, not a minor denominational disagreement, the spirit of the Antichrist. The early church councils pushed back hard. Irenaeus wrote his landmark work against heresies to dismantle this framework. The Nicene Creed in 325 AD explicitly affirmed that Jesus was truly incarnate, truly bodily raised, truly returning in a body that Thomas could touch and a fire that could cook fish on a beach in Galilee. Gnosticism was formally defeated. But here is the part of the story nobody tells you. Its assumptions never actually left. They came back through the most unexpected door imaginable. They came back through Augustine of Hippo, the most influential theologian in the entire history of Western Christianity. The man whose thinking shaped the Catholic tradition, and then 1,000 years later shaped Calvin and Luther and the Protestant Reformation, which means Augustine shaped your church, almost certainly. And before Augustine became a Christian, he spent 9 years inside a Gnostic sect called the Manichaeans. Before that, he was immersed in Neoplatonism, the philosophical heirs of Plato, who taught that the soul was superior to the body and that the path to truth was a path away from physical existence. Augustine rejected the most extreme forms of these ideas after his conversion. He fought for Orthodox Christianity, but those 9 years left something in him. Scholars have documented for centuries how his Neoplatonic formation shaped his theology of the body, his theology of desire, and his concept of concupiscence, the idea that physical longing itself was tainted in ways that went deeper than mere action. And that formation became Western Christianity's formation, which became your Sunday school class, which became the voice inside your head that has been telling you for 40 years that your body is the problem. It was not handed to you by Paul. It was handed to you by Plato, filtered through Gnosticism, absorbed by Augustine, transmitted through the Reformation, and delivered to you on a Sunday morning as though it had always been in the text. It was not. Let us go back to the very beginning. Not the beginning of Paul's letters. The beginning of the Word itself. Before Paul ever wrote a single line, before the New Testament existed, before the word Sarx appeared in a single Christian document, there was a Hebrew word underneath all of it. A word that the Greek translators of the Hebrew scriptures chose to render as sarx. And that Hebrew word is the root of everything Paul is trying to say. Basar, flesh, body, creaturely existence. Basar appears over 260 times in the Hebrew scriptures, and the vast majority of those appearances carry a meaning that is completely, entirely, morally neutral. Basar means body physical tissue, the creaturely, mortal, dependent nature of a human being. When the prophet Isaiah stands before the people and declares, "All flesh is grass, and all its beauty is like the flower of the field," he is not saying the body is sinful. He is not saying physical existence is corrupt. he is saying something far more honest than that. He is saying, you are not God, you are a creature. You are the kind of thing that grows and fades, and cannot hold itself together by sheer force of will. You need to be sustained by something outside yourself. To be Basar is to be finite, dependent, and mortal. That is not a moral accusation. That is an honest description of what it means to be human. Your body is not your problem. Your creatureliness is not your enemy. God made Basar, and when he was finished, he called it very good. But then something shifts in the Hebrew prophetic tradition, and this shift is the seed that Paul will spend his entire theological life harvesting. In Jeremiah chapter 17, the prophet pronounces a curse, and the word he reaches for is Basar, but he is not using it to describe a body. He is using it to describe an orientation, a posture, a way of standing in the world. Cursed is the man who trusts in man and makes flesh his strength, whose heart turns away from the Lord. Jeremiah 17:5. Listen to what is happening there. Jeremiah is not condemning the man who eats too much or feels too much or enjoys his body too much. He is condemning the man who makes flesh his strength. The man who operates as though he is sufficient, who wakes up every morning and, without ever saying it out loud, runs his life as though God is optional, as though his own intellect, his own willpower, his own reputation, his own religious track record is what is keeping him upright. That is Basar as a theological category, not a substance, not a body part, a posture, the deep, quiet posture of a creature who has decided to live as though it is not one. Paul inherits that idea completely. He picks it up from the Hebrew prophets, drops it into Greek, and calls it Sarx. Now, Paul does not use Sarx in one single way. This is where most people go wrong, and this is where the flattened translations cause the most damage. Paul uses this one word to carry at least 5 distinct meanings across his letters. 1. Physical tissue, the biological material of humanity. 2. The whole body, the physical vehicle of existence. 3. Human ancestry, family or genetic kinship lines. 4. Human frailty, creaturely limitation without moral failure. This is what Jesus meant in Gethsemane when he said, "The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." 5. The autonomous ego, the entire self-intellect, will, and emotional autopilot operating apart from God. The New International Version's 1984 decision to translate this 5th use of Sarx as sinful nature was a theological disaster. It implies something located inside your biology, something you were born with and cannot escape. The scholar James Dunn argued extensively that this translation collapses Paul's dynamic, relational, directional word into a static, essentialist category that Paul never intended. Sarx in Paul's 5th use is not what you are made of, it is the direction you are facing. Now, I need you to open Galatians chapter 5 with me, because this is where the whole argument detonates. Paul lists the works of the flesh in verses 19 through 21. And if Sarx simply meant bodily desire or physical appetite, this list should look like a catalog of things the body does when it gets out of control: food, drink, physical indulgence. Here is what the list actually says. Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. Galatians 5:19, 2:1. Sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, 3 items, perhaps 4, that touch the body in the way we usually mean when we use the word flesh. Now count what is left. Enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy. 8 works of the flesh that have absolutely nothing to do with the body. Not one of them is a physical appetite. Not one of them is a bodily craving. Every single one of them is the product of a self that has been placed at the center of its own universe. They are what happen when the ego sits completely intact, while the body is disciplined and fasted and flagellated into submission. Enmity is what happens when I need to be right more than I need to be reconciled. Strife is what happens when my agenda takes precedence over the person in front of me. Divisions are what happen inside churches full of theologically correct people who have never surrendered their need to be in control. That is the flesh, and you can produce every single one of those works without ever once losing a battle with your body. Some of the most thoroughly fleshly people in the history of the church never committed a visible physical sin. They were disciplined, doctrinally precise, religiously impressive by every external standard. And they were operating, completely and continuously, from Sarx, from the settled posture of a self that had quietly made itself the center of everything. If you have been in the church for decades, if you have done the work, if you have been faithful by every visible measure, and you are sitting with a low, persistent sense of exhaustion that you cannot name, I want you to hear this. Paul is not adding another item to your checklist. He is removing one. He is not showing you a new way to perform. He is showing you the thing underneath. Your performance that has been running you without your permission. And naming it is not condemnation. Naming it is the first movement of grace. Now, look at the architecture of Romans chapter 8. Most people read Romans 8 as a victory chapter, and they are not wrong to do so. No condemnation. The Spirit gives life. We are more than conquerors. Every word of that is in there, and every word of it is true. But here is what the structure of the chapter reveals when you step back and look at it as a piece of deliberate literary architecture. Paul opens Romans 8 with liberation. He builds from there the Spirit dwelling in you, adoption as children of God, the inheritance that is coming, the glory that is going to be revealed. The momentum is building and building. And then, right at the heart of the chapter, in verses 22 through 23, the pace changes. The tone drops. And Paul does something that almost no expositor teaches when they preach from this chapter. He groans. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. Romans 8:22, 2-3. Creation groans. Believers groan. And then verse 26. The Spirit Himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. 3 groanings at the structural center of the victory chapter. Paul does not place the groaning at the beginning as the problem to be solved. He does not tuck it at the end as a minor qualification. He puts it at the architectural heart of Romans 8. Because Paul knows something that most of us spend our entire Christian lives refusing to accept, that the honest middle of the journey between liberation and glory is not triumph. It is groaning. And the Spirit is not absent from that groaning. He is in it, interceding inside the very place where we have no words left. The groaning language in these verses draws directly from Isaiah chapters 24 through 27, the great section where creation itself is under the curse, but being held by the promise of Yahweh's final restoration. Paul is not being pessimistic when he places groaning at the center of the chapter. He is being cosmically honest. He is placing your pain inside a story that is larger than your pain. Now look at how the original text separates the flesh from the physical body with absolute precision. Phronema, the settled purpose, the default orientation, the deep inclination of the whole person. In Romans 8, verses 6 and 7, Paul writes that the mind set on the flesh is death, but the mind set on the spirit is life and peace. The word translated mind here is phronema. And phronema does not mean a passing thought. It does not mean the thing you felt in a weak moment last week. Phronema is the word for the settled purpose of a life. The default orientation you face when you are not trying, when nobody is watching, when you are completely and totally yourself. Paul says there are only two directions a human phronema can face: toward the spirit or toward the sarx, toward surrender or toward self-sufficiency. And here is the distinction that the whole Western Christian tradition has missed. Paul uses two completely different Greek words for body in his letters: sarx and soma. They are not synonyms. Soma, the physical body offered, redeemed, and raised. Sarx, the internal orientation crucified and surrendered. Paul never tells you to crucify your soma, never once. In Romans chapter 12, verse 1, he says, "Present your bodies soma as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship." The body is not the enemy. The body is the offering. It is the sarx that goes to the cross, not your body, your autopilot. I want you to introduce you to someone. Her name is Renata. Renata is 61 years old. She has been in the church since she was 19. She has fasted more times than she can count. She has served on the women's ministry team, the hospitality committee, the Sabbath school teaching roster, and the deacon board. She has tithed faithfully for over 40 years. She has been through every spiritual discipline the church has ever recommended, and she has done each one seriously. Nobody would ever call Renata a fleshly person. Not by any conventional definition. She is not drunk. She is not sexually immoral. She has not committed any of the visible sins that get people talked about in church hallways. Her body has been disciplined. Her behavior has been impeccable. Her doctrine has been precise. But there is something happening inside Renata that she has never been able to name. She cannot stop needing people to see how good she is, not consciously. She would never say that out loud. But when the pastor thanks someone else for a contribution she made, something in her darkens. When a younger woman is asked to lead a Bible study that Renata felt she was more qualified to lead, the feeling that rises in her chest is something she has to work very hard to push back down. She has been through 2 church splits in her life. Both times she was theologically certain she was right. She has ended 3 deep friendships over doctrinal disagreements that, looking back now, she can barely reconstruct the details of. Renata is exhausted, and she cannot tell you why, because she has done everything right. She has fought every battle with her body, and she has won every one of them. She has been faithful and present and disciplined and correct. But she has been fighting the wrong enemy for 40 years. The flesh in Renata's life was never her physical appetites. It was her phronema, the settled orientation of her whole person toward needing to be right, needing to be seen, needing to be the most faithful person in the room. Her ego sat completely untouched beneath 4 decades of religious performance, disciplined, immovable, uncrucified. I am not describing Renata to shame her. I am describing Renata because she is sitting in almost every congregation in the world right now. And perhaps, if you are willing to be honest with yourself in this moment, she is sitting somewhere a great deal closer than any congregation. Paul does not look at Renata and say, "You are beyond help." He says, "The Spirit is already in the groan. The Spirit is already interceding in the place where Renata has no words left. The Spirit is already at work in the exhaustion she has been carrying and cannot explain." Because groaning, Paul tells us, is not the absence of grace. It is often the first honest sign that grace has finally found its way deep enough to start doing its real work. The autopilot can be surrendered. It does not have to run you anymore. And now we arrive at the two verses that should have ended the Gnostic framework permanently. The two verses that should have buried the body shame tradition in the 1st century and never let it resurface. And the reason they did not is that we stopped reading them in the language they were written in. The first is Romans chapter 8, verse 3. For God has done what the law, weakened by the flesh, could not do, by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin, he condemned sin in the flesh. Romans 8:3. Read that one more time, slowly. God did not condemn the flesh. He condemned sin in the flesh, inside it, from within it. The method God chose to deal with the Sarx problem was not to destroy the body, not to bypass the physical world, not to arrange a purely spiritual transaction at a safe distance from material existence. The method was incarnation. His own Son came in the likeness of sinful flesh. He entered Sarx. He moved into the neighborhood. The Greek word translated condemned here is katakrino. It means to judge decisively against, to pronounce sentence upon, to defeat from within the domain of the accused. And Paul says this defeat happened in sarki, in the flesh, not above it, not at a distance from it, inside it. Jesus entered the very domain that the Gnostics said God could never touch, and from inside that domain, he won. God did not avoid Sarx, he occupied it, and from inside it, he condemned everything that had corrupted it. But it is John who lands the final decisive word. And I need you to hear this the way a 1st century Greek reader would have heard it, because for us, it has become so familiar that the scandal of it has gone completely silent. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John 1:14. The Word became Sarx. John did not write, the Word became human in a general sense. He did not write, the Word became a person. He chose this specific word, Sarx. The exact word his Greek audience had been told for centuries was the inferior, corrupted, material stuff that the divine could never genuinely touch. And he placed that word at the center of the most important sentence in his entire gospel. The Word became the very thing the Gnostics said God would never become. One New Testament scholar described this sentence as having stunned the Greek mind, for whom the separation of the divine spirit from the mundane world was an axiom of belief, not a gentle theological adjustment. A direct, frontal collision with the deepest assumption of the Greco-Roman religious world. God did not stay at a safe spiritual distance from the physical. He chose it. He affirmed it. He entered it. And then he was raised in it. Because the resurrection of Jesus was not the escape from the body into pure spirit, it was not the soul floating free of its physical prison. Thomas put his fingers in the wounds. The disciples watched him eat breakfast on a beach in Galilee. The resurrected Jesus was physical, embodied, and tangible, transformed, yes. Glorified, yes. But present in a body that could be touched and a voice that could be recognized and a face that could be seen. Paul understood what this meant. Present your bodies, Soma, as a living sacrifice. Not, leave your body behind on the way to something higher. Not, escape your body into a more spiritual form of existence. Present it, offer it, because the body is not the thing you are trying to get away from. The body is the thing that gets redeemed. You are not the problem. Your body is not the enemy. The autopilot that has been running your life from the center of yourself, producing enmity and strife and rivalry and division while your body was being disciplined into exhaustion. That is what was nailed to the cross, and it does not have to run you anymore. That is not a self-help promise. That is not a therapeutic technique. That is the gospel of Jesus Christ, read in the language it was written in, heard in the world it was written for, landing with the full weight it was always meant to carry. The word became Sarx, which means Sarx, your creaturely material existence. Your body is the kind of thing God considered worth entering, worth walking around in, worth dying in, worth raising from the dead. If this channel has given you a theological depth you stopped believing was available on this platform, think of one person in your life right now who has been fighting this exact same war against the wrong enemy. Someone carrying a weight of religious shame that has brought exhaustion rather than freedom. Share this documentary directly with them, not to feed metrics, but because one word reaching a soul in the dark is precisely why this independent research is done. Hit subscribe so you do not miss it, and leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Step out of the performance. We will see you in the next one.